My project is titled Clinical and Epidemiological Profile of Breast Cancer Screening Patients at Ocean Road Cancer Institute. Breast cancer, as Zoe and Darcy mentioned, is the most common cancer in women worldwide. Specifically in Tanzania, it is the second most common cancer and second most leading cause of cancer mortality in women after cervical cancer. If you look to the graph on the right, you can see that the highest age standardized incidence rates are found in high-income countries like Australia and in America, but the lowest age standardized incidence rates are in countries in Eastern and Middle Africa. But these same low-income countries also have the highest age standardized mortality rates. Specifically, Tanzania, which is in Eastern Africa, the age standardized incidence rate is 17.8, and the age standardized mortality rate is 7.8. That makes a mortality to incidence ratio of nearly half, which means that almost all women diagnosed with breast cancer, about half of them will die of the disease. These are some common risk factors and symptoms found in breast cancer. The risk of breast cancer increases with age, as does having an earlier age of menarche and later age of menopause, because this increases the lifetime exposure to hormones such as estrogen. Reproductive factors are found to be protective for breast cancer, so having kids and having an earlier age at first pregnancy are found to be protective. Genetic mutations like those in BRCA1 and BRCA2, which are tumor suppressor genes, are found in about 10% of breast cancer patients. Other risk factors for breast cancer include having dense breasts, family history of breast cancer, or personal history of breast cancer or other non-cancerous condition like atypical ductal hyperplasia. On the right are images of common symptoms found in Tanzanian women with late-stage breast cancer. So usually women present with a breast mass and breast pain, but when these symptoms are neglected, they can progress further to nipple retraction, peau d'orange, bloody discharge, and ulceration. So the first picture shows peau d'orange, which describes the orange color and dimpling of the skin. The second picture shows nipple retraction, and the bottom two show bloody discharge and ulceration of the breast. So Ocean Road Cancer Institute, as my colleagues mentioned before, is the only specialized cancer center in Tanzania. 5 years ago, Ocean Road opened a breast cancer early detection clinic after the success of their cervical cancer screening clinic in the hopes of detecting and downstaging breast cancer. Some of the services Ocean Road provides are screening, ultrasound, and pathology, and for those who are diagnosed with breast cancer, it offers chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and palliative care. Because Tanzania lacks a national cancer registry, it's difficult to understand the true nature of breast cancer in Tanzania. So for my study, I wanted to evaluate the clinical and epidemiological breast profile of patients who came to the screening clinic specifically in 2018 and compare demographics and symptoms between women who were referred for further testing, such as ultrasounds, mammograms, and FNACs, and compare it to women who were not referred for further testing and just sent home. I also looked at symptoms of women who were admitted for breast cancer treatment at ORCI in 2018, but had no history of screening, and compared it to women who were screened and found to have breast cancer to see if the screening clinic was successful in detecting earlier stages of breast cancer. So my study is a retrospective cohort study conducted using data from January of 2018 to December of 2018. I analyzed the demographics, clinical symptoms, types of tests, and stage of breast cancer, all of which Darcy and Zoe collected, and further projects from the electronic medical record and paper medical records. I included women only who had a screening record from January of 2018 to December of 2018, and had a clinician note indicating their symptoms or their referral status, and women who were treated for breast cancer in ORCI in 2018. So there were two arms to my study. The first arm focused on women who came to the breast cancer screening clinic, so about 4,000 patients, and they were grouped into people who were referred for further testing, not referred for further testing, and women who were normal from the nurse's breast exam. I didn't include the third category in my analysis because they had no clinician notes indicating their referral status, but after talking to one of the doctors at ORCI, I learned that these patients did in fact have normal breast exams, but the information wasn't uploaded into the EMR, which my colleagues mentioned before is one of the discrepancies. I further categorized referred patients into patients who ended up with breast cancer, patients with other breast disease such as fibroadenomas, and patients who had normal breast tests or pending test results. Similarly, I broke down the not referred for further testing group into people who had symptoms and were not given any treatments and just sent home to come back for a follow-up, patients who had symptoms and were given medications like meloxicam, and patients who had a normal physician breast exam. For the second arm of my study, I had a cohort of breast cancer patients who were treated at ORCI but received no screening, and I compared that to my group of screened breast cancer patients. These are some demographics I collected for my screened and breast cancer patients. The graphs on the left are all screening clinic patients, and the graphs on the right are all breast cancer patients. So the yellow bars on the graphs on the left represent patients who had no further testing, and the red bars indicate patients who were referred for further testing. These bars, the blue ones, represent breast cancer patients with no screening records, and the green bars represent patients who had breast cancer and had a screening record. As you can see from the top graph, the majority of screening clinic patients are between the ages of 25 to 54, and the majority of breast cancer patients are between the ages of 35 to 54. The bottom graphs show the region of residence, and as you can see, most screening clinic patients come from within Dar es Salaam, but most breast cancer patients are from outside of Dar es Salaam. These are demographics on marital status and employment. The graphs on the top show that most screening clinic patients and breast cancer patients are married, and that for employment, the screening clinic patients, the jobs range from being peasants or farmers to businesses, whereas breast cancer patients are mostly farmers or peasants. Education, parity, family history of breast cancer, and breast exams, the information was only available for screening patients because it was listed in the screening record, so it's not there for not screened breast cancer patients. You can see on this graph, the orange bar represents patients who had no further testing, the blue bar represents patients who were referred for further testing, and the green bar represents breast cancer patients from the screening clinic. As you can see, most patients had a primary level of education. In terms of parity, most patients had between 1 to 6 kids. And the graphs on the bottom, the green represents screening clinic patients, and the blue represents breast cancer patients from the screening clinic. So as you can see, breast cancer patients usually had more history of family breast cancer, were more likely to conduct breast self-exams, and more likely to have had a clinician breast exam. These charts show the symptoms that patients came in with for their clinical breast exams. The graph on the left shows that the most common symptoms patients presented with, whether they came to the screening clinic and were referred or found to have breast cancer, the majority of them had breast lump and breast pain. But the unique symptoms indicating that a patient had breast cancer were breast swelling, breast ulceration, nipple retraction, and peau d'orange. The graph on the bottom shows early stage and late stage patients between breast cancer patients who were screened and not screened. As you can see, majority of the patients were late stage, about 75% of patients were late stage. These percentages do not add up to 100 because some of the screening records were missing staging information. However, as you can see, there's a slightly higher percentage of early stage breast cancer patients who came to the screening clinic. The graph on the right shows differences in symptoms between early stage and late stage breast cancer patients. This is including all breast cancer patients, regardless of whether they were screened or not screened. As you can see, symptoms that are present more in late stage are breast swelling, breast ulceration, and peau d'orange. To sum up my initial findings, I found that screened breast cancer patients were more likely to seek care earlier and present at an earlier stage. Also, symptoms present in late stage are breast swelling, breast ulceration, and pute orange, and that breast cancer patients were more likely to do self-breast exams and have had breast exams done by clinical workers. So for further research projects that CE students could work on is evaluating the success of the screening clinic by comparing the years before the screening clinic and after to see if there has been an earlier detection of breast cancer. My project only focused on a snapshot of the clinic for 1 year, so it would be interesting to see the trends of the clinic over the years. Also, as Fatima mentioned before, we are medical students and we are working in Harlem and hopefully other underserved populations. So it would be interesting to see how cultural practices amongst immigrant populations in New York City and across the United States impacts their access to screening and the effectiveness of these screening programs. So this summer, as Dr. Solomon mentioned, it was our first time outside of the country and in a foreign place, and it was really an amazing experience. I learned how to design my own project and conduct it from start to finish and deal with any unforeseen challenges. I learned to adapt to a new environment and communicate with people who didn't speak the same language as me or share a culture similar to mine. We also had the opportunity to go to local and urban hospitals like Mukarangia, and this is a picture of us looking at their logbook to see how they document the data. And we also had the opportunity to shadow the pathologist at the path lab in ORCI and see biopsy slides. And that's also us at Mukarangia at the surgical ward where they keep the patients. So yeah, we also had a lot of fun in Tanzania. It was interesting to see the culture, to see the people, to interact with them. We were lucky enough to be able to go to Zanzibar and to go on a safari. That's a lion that we saw. So it was a really great experience. And I would like to end by acknowledging Dr. Solomon, Dr. Masami, and Dr. Musalagi for mentoring me through this process, and my school and the Mac-Lipman Fellowship for funding me, and my colleagues Zoe and Darcy for helping me with my project. Thank you.